Marshall Chess, you produced that, and you're here talking to us today. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
I'm delighted too. We'll talk about Electric Mud a little bit later on, but let's go right back to the beginning, or at least very near the beginning. What is your earliest memory of Chess Records?
A place where I could go see my father. I never saw my father. He was always working. He had the nightclub at night and the record business during the day. He worked 2 jobs. He was always there. So it was the place, and I was the oldest son, and of course I wanted to be around my father like every boy does. It was the place where I could see my father. So I began going to Chess Records, and he immediately gave me a broom to sweep the floor. That's my first memory, was the dust and dirt of Chess Records.
Did blues people come to your house, though, when you were sort of even littler?
Not often, but my first memory of a blues person was Muddy Waters coming to visit my father. I was very young, 7 years old, 6 years old. I was playing in the front, and a big black Cadillac pulled up. I watched this man get out. He was a big man, and he was wearing this bright lime green fluorescent suit. His hair was 6 or 8 inches high and glistening. His shoes, that was what really got me. They were covered in cowskin with the actual fur, the fur part of the skin on it. And he walked right up to me with pure confidence, looked at me and said, "You must be young Chess. I'm Muddy Waters. Is your father home?" And I went in and I got my father, and that was my first experience. And I've often thought it was the same as if a spaceship had landed and an alien had come out, because I had never seen anyone. Yes, I had seen black people. I lived in Chicago, but not like the way Muddy Waters looked. And Muddy Waters had this amazing charisma, almost regal in stature. You just couldn't be around Muddy Waters and not feel that amazing strength as a person. So he was my first meeting of a true chess artist, and he was by far my most favorite of the chess artists.
Oh, was he?
Oh, yes.
Did you, on that first occasion, though, were you excited, or were you actually scared, or what, at meeting this guy? You must have
Scared was a better word than excited. It was still the young period of insecurity, strange things. But I always had a comfortable feeling around black people, being in Chicago, where I was around black people a lot. So that didn't bother me. But his stature, he just, he made me sort of nervous, the way he was so, looked you in the eye.
He kind of had a 6 or 8 inch pompadour, but had he actually got his hair all sort of slicked at that time? I guess he was.
Yeah, those process parlors.
Yeah.
That was the first thing when you got, that was in vogue, The process parlors, where they used to call it a conch job.
A conch, yes.
But, yes.
Well, they actually used sort of caustic soda or something to straighten,
in
kill
fact,
the hair.
In the original Electric Mud album, I included an 8-page booklet of him getting his hair done.
Getting a process.
Yes,
yeah,
that's
right.
a rare collector's booklet.
It's on the CD reissue.
Yes, I've heard that they put that on there.
Excellent. And including your reminiscences of seeing Timothy Leary when you were a young man.
I saw Timothy Leary, and Bob Dylan was the opening act. And Timothy Leary was wearing white robes. And I was right there with everyone else in the audience. Half of them were on acid, tripping out.
We suddenly leapt from sort of 1948, 49, 50, all the way to 68 or so. When was your actual involvement with the company, though? I've got you down as being sort of working there at the age of 13. Is that right?
Yes, I really, 13 was really a launching. Year of my 13th summer, my father took me on... Actually, it was my second road trip. I had forgotten about the first one until recently, when this historian found some article in Billboard magazine saying Leonard's on the road with his son, Marshall, 1953. I was 11.
11.
Yes, was my first trip. And that trip was amazing because we went to a place called Randy's Record Shop in Gallatin, Tennessee. That was owned by a man named Randy Woods, which later started a record called Dot Records, which was a white label. But at Randy's Record Mart was the first time I saw white people buying black music, and I was amazed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Gallatin, Tennessee.
Gallatin, Tennessee. And then I went from there with him to Atlanta to another major radio station that was playing black music. That's what we were on a road trip. I had forgotten all about that
What
trip.
were those road trips about? Because were they a mixture of things? I mean, were you looking for talent as well as promoting the
You were
records?
always looking for talent. Right now, I'm still looking for talent. I mean, if I would go in some club here, it's in B. You know, we were always looking for talent, but they were primarily about radio play and distribution. Those
Yeah.
were the two things. Radio play was the key element of all independent record labels of that era. And of course, we had the great payola in those days, which means we went around the country with a lot of $50 and $75 paying disc jockeys to play the records. It was not illegal then, and it was the concrete of the wall that made the independent record business, because if you didn't get the radio play, you could never sell the product. It's how these great original sounding blues, R&B, and rock records got exposed, was through payola.
It's an extraordinary thing now to think that it was something that wasn't illegal, and yet people's careers were broken.
After it was made illegal, but not before. And one of the a good payola story is on one of these early trips with my father. He would go somewhere like, say, Mobile, Alabama, and he'd go in and he would take care of the disc jockeys, give them the records to play, and say goodbye. I'm going to New Orleans. But we wouldn't go to New Orleans. We'd go to a motel on the outside of town, and we'd just sit around the room. My dad would be smoking cigarettes, listening to that guy's show. And a third of the time, they wouldn't play the record. And he would be he would go right into the control room, because they would rip you off as well.
Oh, so they would take your money but not play your record?
Of course. So you'd stick around. That was one of my dad's tricks. And one time, my uncle got taken by a disc jockey who called him up and said, "Phil, I'm on the air right now. Hold it. And this is so-and-so. I'm playing another great chess record." And months later, my uncle found out the guy wasn't on the air. He made it all up. He was doing it from his house. My uncle wired him some money because he thought he was playing all these records in a row. Those are good payola stories.
Oh, so payola sometimes worked really the other way.
Of course. It worked all different ways.
How many of those trips did you do? And I mean, I've read that they were 5,000-mile round trips.
They were major trips. More, I only did in car, maybe 3 or 4 that I remember. But my father did it all the time, and my uncle did too. They divided up not only territories, but disc jockeys that their personalities worked best with. They used each other very well.
Yeah, I have this mental picture, which has been with me for many years now, since I can't remember when I first read about it, of you and your dad, actually selling records out of the trunk of the car. Has that been somewhat romanticized? Or?
No, because you would go to some places where there wasn't distribution, and you'd have the latest record that was just recorded 2 weeks before that you'd give to that disc jockey. And you could go to the 2 or 3 shops that sold records in that town and sell 25 to each shop and make, $100. And that would pay for the gas in the motels and being on the road. We always had records. And I remember on the 13-year-old trip, my dad recording on a stage made of hay bales somewhere in Alabama. I don't know who it was.
You
I
don't remember who the artist was?
It wasn't any star. But he was always willing because, the Deep South, even though slavery was over, still was a lot like it had been during.
Yeah.
Those people didn't leave after slavery. They just got indebted to the company store. And they stayed there, and their entertainment was done that way. And actually, they had like a stage made of cotton, wasn't hay, cotton bales. And the singer got up on there, and my dad recorded with a wire recorder.
Yeah.
I remembered some wire.
So that was
wire.
So that was in the trunk of the car as well.
Yes, we had
the wire recorder.
Yeah, the wire recorder, small portable wire recorder. Not small by today's standards, but it could fit in the trunk of a Cadillac.
Yes,
We always had a Cadillac on those trips.
It's somewhat bigger than a DAT
Yeah.
machine, though.
Yeah.
And I've also read that you, one of the people that you were on a trip and he recorded was Arthur Crudup or Percy Lee Crudup?
I wasn't on that trip.
Oh, you weren't there?
No, I wasn't. My famous road recording was Bo Diddley's beach party in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, where we all got arrested. Because Jerome Green, Bo Diddley's maraca player, jumped off the stage and white girls danced around him. And they came in with dogs and shut down the show. I was recorded that out of mono. recorder.
What did they
With
say?
3 mics.
You know, what exactly, who did they charge and with what?
They came to me, they threw me against the wall, and they said, Jew boy, you messing around with these niggers going to get you locked up where no one's going to find you. That's exactly what was said to me.
All for Bo Diddley.
All for Bo Diddley, but, they didn't like, at that time, in the South, it was the 60s, they did not like any public interaction of black and white. Jerome Green, that just brought that memory. I mean, Jerome Green was like a guy with Africa in his blood. I mean, he played those maracas, the rhythms that came out of him. His whole body would just become one with the maracas, and he would dance around that stage and play it. It was unbelievable. He was fabulous. He was amazing, the rhythms he would play.
I covered that song with the Manfreds in
With the
1964.
Manfreds. Did you have a maraca player on it?
Yeah, me. Probably not quite as well as Jerome Green, but anyway, bring it to Jerome.
But he always reminded me years later, when I would think of him, he was like one of those kind of guys you'd find in Africa 1,000 years ago.
Yeah,
who was
but
just-
only this time he's in a sort of sharp suit with
but he could never
those
play.
jackets.
He could have never played an instrument. It was the rhythm. He
Yeah.
had the rhythm running through him. This kind of rhythm. It's amazing. Paul Gayton was actually a very well-known band leader in New Orleans, and he had this really close relationship with my father, with my family. He became like a member of our family, and us like a member of his. He worked for Chess for many years for free. But on the second road trip of mine, my dad let me drive the car while he slept. He used to go out every night, all night, while I stayed in the motel. I never asked him what he did. I hope he had a good time. Hope you hear me now, Dad. I hope you had some fun. But we got to New Orleans, and that was a whole other scene for chess that not many people talk about. Our most successful was, of course, the Clarence Frogman Henry. The first hit, I don't know, not but I do. First with Ain't Got No Home,
Yeah.
where he used the sounds
the
of a
frog
frog
in
and
it,
everything. And then we had the famous one, But I Do. We had the great artist, Bobby Charles, who was from Lafayette, Louisiana, who first recorded See You Later, Alligator, which then Bill Haley and the Comets made the hit, but Bobby's record was much better.
Bobby recorded that on chairs.
Yeah, it was
Was he your first white artist? And
He might have been the first white artist. I've never thought of it as first white artist, but he could be. Of course, Bobby was as black as a black man. When Bobby would come to Chicago, he would always seek out where Muddy was playing, and Muddy knew Bobby from chess, and he would call him on stage, and everyone would, white guy, what? And as soon as Bobby would sing 2 or 3 bars of a song, the place would go crazy, because Bobby had deep soul that would come out. Bobby was great.
And he wrote one of the great songs, which is still being recorded today. Why are people like that?
Yes, I mean, Bobby Charles is a great talent.
Which Muddy recorded on his Woodstock album.
Yes, it's true.
Were you still involved with Muddy at the time?
No,
of
I
that?
wasn't. I saw Muddy during that period. I went to see him in Woodstock, which is where I live now, in that area. But I wasn't involved with him then. But that was an interesting record too.
So you would go down to New Orleans on these road trips, or at least once you did.
I
and,
did on this
did
one
you see
trip.
Paul Gayton down there?
Oh yeah, Paul Gayton would meet us. There was a famous studio called Cosmos in New Orleans where most of the stuff was recorded. Paul used to run the sessions with all the top New Orleans musicians. Mac Rabenak, who then became Dr. John, he played piano on a lot of the early chess New Orleans records. We had a great record called Mardi Gras Mambo by Lou Welsh, I think, which is still a classic. It's played every Mardi Gras, day and night. We had Iko Iko, which was the original, the famous.
Was that Sugar Boy Crawford?
Yeah, Sugar Boy Crawford. Yeah. So that was a whole other part of chess that not many people know about. But yes, we were very involved through Paul Gayton with the New Orleans scene.
When does Willie Dixon sort of arrive on the scene, as far as you remember?
I think I don't remember the exact time, but my recollection, it must be the late 40s that Willie came on the scene. Willie was a key person, a key songwriter, a key record producer. I remember riding around in this station wagon with him. Willie was so big that and the car was old with weak springs, that when you'd go out with Willie in the car, you were always sitting tilted over. When he got in the car, it would rock over to one side. one of Willie's key jobs was getting the bands to the studio because many of the players, they had no phones, and they had 5 women. They only Willie knew what woman, what night of the week they would be at. So if there was a session, there would be Willie. He'd be going around digging up like a detective and bringing them all in to play. Willie was a great part of the Chess success story.
Was that the artists or the sort of, the sidemen as well? Presumably they were a bit more reliable, were they?
Yes, no, at all. Artists some of the artists, you had a guy like Muddy Waters, totally reliable, and Howling Wolf, reliable. But the ones that were, that were drinking really heavily, always ran into those problems.
Howling Wolf was always completely reliable?
He was very reliable.
Yeah.
And he had the widest feet. Howling Wolf, again, I'm giving you childhood memories. Howling Wolf always fascinated me because when he shook your hand, you felt like it was a pea in a giant thing. I mean, his hands were so big, and so were his feet. He could never buy shoes wide enough, and he would buy a brand new pair of shoes, take a razor blade, and have to slit the side of it. So you'd always see part of his sock sticking out the side of his shoe. That's one of my memories of Howling Wolf, And he was always giving me sexual advice, Howling Wolf.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, he'd always say,
you can't share that with us.
Yes, I can. I could tell you, maybe I'll try to share one that I can take it in the right. He would say, the best woman is a wino woman. You can just take him in the alley, and 10 minutes later leave. They don't even know you was there. That's what he would say. Other women give you trouble. They want things. That's the kind of advice I was getting as a teenager.
That's dreadful for you. I don't know where to take this conversation now, after that, except let's talk about the Rolling Stones and when they came to visit. I mean, we're dodging around time-wise, of course. We came forward to Clarence Frogman Henry and back to Willie Dixon and all that sort of stuff. But, I mean, when the Stones came to 2120 to record, you were there?
I was there. I helped set up the recording sessions.
You were 22. Mm-hmm. At that point, had you been granted a position in the company, or were you still...
I was still watching my father. No, the boss's son, watching my father. I hate to take this down into Southern mentality, but being the boss's son was a great place to be with these early blues artists because, these were guys, a lot of them that had come up from the South, where the boss's son was like the boss. I mean, I was part of the family, and I was treated really, very openly and warmly by most of the artists. But I was still, at 22, I was still watching and learning.
Now, when I asked you about how true it was that you sold records out of the trunk of the car, you said, no, that's true enough. Mm-hmm. But what about the story that when the Stones arrived in the studio, Muddy Waters was painting the ceiling?
Untrue. I've read that. I mean, people have asked me that. I don't think Muddy Waters would paint his own house, yet alone the studio. But Muddy Waters came by the studio, and I remember Willie Dixon, too, trying to get some songs recorded by the Stones.
Oh, really?
Yes. I mean... again, Chess Records was a place for making money, doing business. The black blues artists, my father and my uncle, all were in it for the money, for the business. More than any kind of historical context. But Muddy Waters never painted the recording studio, at least not to my knowledge or my eyesight. And I've asked my uncle that. None of us. We all laugh because it's just not his personality, Yes, if my father was there painting, he might have stood next to him and painted with him, but he wasn't brought in to paint. No way.
Not long ago, you said that your favorite track on that 12x5 album by the Rolling Stones was It's All Over Now?
I like that one a lot, yeah. Oh, my favorite track is 2120 South Michigan.
Oh, you like that?
Honored the address of our company. I thought that was a great thing, To this day, I'm amazed at that, The Rolling Stones have really been the greatest at admitting their, musical heritage to the roots and how important the Chess records were and the address. It was great. They've been great. And they are the greatest rock and roll band to me still.
Were you actually involved in the production of that, or were you just sort of...
Strictly Andrew Oldham working with Ron Malo, the engineer.
Ron Malo,
yes.
Right.
Yes. I mean, they were after the Chess sound. I think they thought well, if you come in the Chess studio, it's going to sound like a Chess record. I don't think that happened because the studio had something to do with the sound. But, you know, as far as my own recollection, it was the playing. The playing, you know, on the record is what made him sound that way.
Yeah, I mean it's a bit like people who want to try and sound like somebody, so they ask what strings he's using or what kind of harp or stuff like that.
Yes, I mean, one time a blues harmonica player drove me crazy, asking find out from Little Walter what kind of microphone he used to get that sound. What kind of microphone? So I ran into Little Walter. It happened to be the day after I'd gotten one of those phone calls, and I said, Walter, someone's driving me crazy. Let me get rid of this guy. Tell me, what kind of mic do you use to get that sound? He looked at me like strangely. He said, whatever one I haven't pawned. Meaning, you know, it had nothing to do with the mic or the amp. You know, it had to do with the way he played.
If you haven't got the sound before you start with which microphone,
exactly.
You're not going to get it with the microphone.
Yes, I mean, I'm sure today there's technology that can give a guitar player or someone certain sounds. But back then there wasn't. It was played, you know, more than anything.
Fleetwood Mac on Jazz FM, and not only Fleetwood Mac, but also Walter Shaky Horton and Otis Spann and S.P. Leary. That must have been good fun.
It was good fun. It was another one of those albums I had known. It was Mike Vernon, Seymour Stein, who ended up owning Sire Records after that. They called me to help set up these Fleetwood Mac and Chicago sessions, which I did.
Again, did the guys think that they were going to get a different sound because they were at the studio?
This was a different studio. It wasn't at the 2120. This was at the new studio when we left 2120 to 21st Street.
Is that Tamar?
Terramar, no. I think it was still called Terramar then, which was named after my uncle's son Terry and me, Marshall.
Oh, I see. I always wondered what it was. Terramar. That's Terry and Marshall.
Those were different sessions, different studio, but I think they just wanted the atmosphere of Chess Records.
And also they wanted as many of the musicians as they could find.
Yeah, as many of the musicians. So we rounded up Willie. I remember Willie was there. Everyone came by. Buddy Guy. Yeah, they came by. Everyone came by, and it was good.
Had you known anything about Fleetwood Mac before they approached you?
Yeah, I mean, not really, you know, but I knew of them from Mike and Seymour, you know, and that was happening.
Oh, so you already knew Mike Vernon?
I already knew Mike Vernon, yeah. I knew Mike Vernon when I first started coming to England. He was just his brother, Mike and Richard Vernon, they were really into the blues. They were part of the first wave of the British blues lovers that I was exposed to.
Did you on those sessions sort of notice anything particularly good about Fleetwood Mac? I mean, did you think, hey, that guitar player,
I liked the Peter Green. That's what I noticed more than anything was Peter Green.
You did notice him?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because, you know, I was, even though I heard many things, I hadn't, at that era, I still hadn't seen that many white people playing that style. Yeah. And, I did notice Peter Green.
1966, you did an album with Muddy Waters called Muddy Brass and the Blues.
Yes.
Or at least what it says on the sleeve is supervised by Marshall Chess.
Right.
I think it's another Ron Malo engineering job.
Yeah.
And I don't know who produced it. Would it be Ralph Bass or something?
It might have been. I don't remember the details. You know, supervised meant that you came up with the idea and you put it together. And maybe you weren't in the control room directing it.
Yes. But actually, it's produced by Gene Barge and Ralph Bass, and the arrangements are by Gene Barge and Charles Stepney, and it's all that sort of stuff. Album supervision by Marshall Chess.
Exactly.
So, was this a case of being in there and just making sure that they didn't waste studio time?
No,
or it was more than that.
This was a case of coming up with a concept to sell. I mean, you know, it'd be nice to say to help Muddy, but it wasn't. It was to sell more albums, which indirectly helped the artist and the company. Because by that time we had the overhead was more, LPs were out. It was a concept. So you'd come up with the idea and you would discuss it, and then you would just assign it, you know, to the people to be in the control room. And then if you supervised it, you were in and out of it, you know, 10 times a day. You'd come in and check it out, listen.
See how it's going.
Exactly.
And then
but
get
you
back
weren't-
to the phone.
Yeah, you weren't really, exactly. You weren't really sitting in there the whole time.
Did you actually learn production, at your daddy's knee sort of thing?
I learned from watching and emulating my father and uncle, and Ron Maylow and all the engineers.
Right. So, but I mean, did anybody say, right now, look, this is how we get such and such an effect?
I was
or-
never taught that way. My father's style was watch me.
Yeah.
Watch and ask questions if you want, but more or less watch, and then try it yourself. He was rough.
In 1967, the cadet concept begins. Is this
Right.
your baby?
That's my baby. I was, like I say, a child of that whole psychedelic revolution in America. I went to the Woodstock Festival. I drove there from Chicago. I was lucky enough to be at the right age at the right time. And I decided, and then I was touring America at the beginning of FM radio in America. I was taking nationwide driving trips, visiting all the FM stations, and it was so great. At that time, you could walk into FM radio with a handful of albums, and they'd set you right down and play them. It wasn't playlists. It was a whole kind of free-form radio. So I was aware of this whole new psychedelic generation. Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, the Woodstock Festival. So I started this label, Cadet Concept. And they were really, what it really was were my concepts. It was like my canvas, and I had the key to the studio. And I went in at night and produced most of those late into the night.
She's all right. And then, all of a sudden, about a minute's worth of My Girl, instrumentally.
Yeah.
Why did they... I mean, whose idea was that? Did it happen spontaneously?
Spontaneous. And it was so... when you're in the presence of spontaneous creativity, there's something special. So I left it because it was very special how that happened.
It
just
is
happened
actually a
totally.
great moment.
Yes. I mean, it's a real musical moment. Somehow it just happened. No one planned it. Purely spontaneous.
And I got to say that those musicians are wonderful. You had Pete Cosey on guitar. Now, I know that Muddy sometimes or subsequently complained about the sort of amount of fuzz and funny effects and stuff on Cosey's guitar. But, I mean, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Muddy, it's funny because Muddy did a second psychedelic album with me called After the Rain. And then years later, I read where he was saying some things that, people would ask him about it. But I remember Muddy loving the sales of Electric Mud because it was the first time he got a big royalty check in years, and he loved that, Years later, when he came into his own again as this great blues icon, which he is and should always have been, he sort of put down that little era. But it was never meant as as disrespect to Muddy Waters. It was, like I say, it was an experiment, like an artist's painting. So,
and it wasn't meant as a complete and forever change of
no
direction.
way, never. It was just trying something new.
Because he immediately went back to doing, the sort of Chicago stuff that
Yes.
he'd been doing for quite a long time, didn't he?
Right.
I can't remember exactly what the next album was after that, but I'm quite sure that. In fact, I think I don't know whether those were sort of moonlighting, but he went off and did albums for Douglas Records or
Right.
Muse Records, mainly featuring the Sidemen, Buford
Exactly.
and Luther Johnson
Right.
and so on. But I mean, he did. You're right. He did After the Rain the following year, about a year later,
Right.
'69, wasn't it?
Right.
And that had almost exactly the same band, although they'd lost the third guitar player, Roland
Exactly.
Faulkner, by then. But it was
Yeah.
Phil Upchurch and Pete Cosey on guitars,
Right.
Louis Satterfield, wonderful bass player, Maurice Jennings was
Right.
the
Maurice
drummer.
Jennings, who then played with Ramsey Lewis after.
Yeah, Charles Stepney and Charles Stepney on keyboards, and he
Yes.
also did the arrangements along with Gene Barge and everything. So, in fact, there was a lot of continuity there anyway, because a lot of those musicians had played on.
Yeah, they were my chess boys. They were there every day, and they were great players. And no one ever, conceptualized this is going to be Muddy's new sound forever. It was purely experimental music, with Muddy being the vocalist.
Great musicians. on those records.
We had the best. Donny Hathaway. We had major, the greats of Chicago music came through the Chess system.
We're talking
they
to
learned-
Marshall Chess. I want to talk to you about what was the name of the company that bought Chess at that stage? GRT.
GRT.
Well, your father died in October of '69.
Right.
You by that time you had done both the Muddy Waters and the Howling Wolf electric.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they were electric already, but you know what I mean. That was just a buzzword at the time, wasn't it?
Well, the original name, here's the thing about me and my father, that we came up with for the band was the Electric Niggers.
You was,
And my father wouldn't let me do it.
No.
He stopped that.
Well,
He
but
said
would-
you just can't do that.
but did they themselves? Want to
yeah,
be
it was
called,
the
they
band.
wanted
Oh
to be
yeah,
called
they
the
wanted to be
Electric
called
Niggers.
that.
How
These were
wonderful.
avant-garde players.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, as you say, Pete Cosey, the
Yeah.
guitarist, he went on to play with Miles Davis.
Yeah, Miles heard him on those albums and loved it. Yep. Miles liked them.
Miles listened to Chess albums.
Of course.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yeah, of course. Because Miles was coming from the same kind of place. Miles, also like I love Little Walter,
I think that's just great
Yeah.
because sometimes less people than Miles would look down on guys like Little Walter.
No, Miles was able to hear the creativity.
I believe he called him a genius.
Yes, he did. Miles called Walter a genius. Yeah. To me, Chess was a fabulously creative place to work. 3 or 4 nights a week, we would sit around till late into the night, just discuss playing music, discussing what direction to take things, where to go. It was a whole other, the end of this great what I call creative era of in-house record companies, just like the movie industry had their in-house, and that ended to these independent things. It was the last of that great thing. Motown, of course, had the same kind of thing.
You speak of the last of. It's an interesting period to read about. That after your father, before he died, sold the company
Yes.
to GRT for something in excess of $10 million.
Right, but ended up getting virtually nothing, because most of the sale was in stock that became valueless.
Interesting.
Yes.
But you became you and your uncle Phil ran the company.
No, they never wanted my Uncle Phil. They were idiots.
Oh, that's right.
They
chose
forced.
you.
They chose me because I was part of the young new wave. They sort of forced my uncle out, which my father died. My uncle really didn't want to be in anyway. I mean, he was glad to, it was like an early retirement for him.
Yeah.
I began running it, and it became a nightmare within weeks. I mean, it was people owning my family's business, other people owning it than my family, directing it in stupid ways, more interested in the figures than the music.
Yeah. You have said about the period immediately before that although the figures were good, the company was in trouble.
The company was in trouble because even though the figures were good overall, our creative direction was floundering. And actually, the sale came at the worst time. Had it not been sold, I'm sure we would have straightened our path and we'd be around today. But it came at a time, so they bought something that, even though the figures were great, the creative drive was floundering. I wanted to go into white rock and roll. My father was saying it's the end of white people owning black music. The major upswing of the white people buying blues had not really happened.
No.
It was just the beginning.
And yet it wasn't that long since you'd had such great sort of... You had number one, soul R&B records like Rescue Me by
Right.
Fontella Bass and... what's the big... what's the big...
Well, Tell Mama, Etta James,
Yes.
which was another big one.
Little Milton.
Little Milton, Grits and
We're Gonna Make It.
Groceries, Bobby Moore, Searchin', we had great records, but there was a certain creative direction that was just in a floundering stage. I'm not saying it would have been the end, but it wasn't the best time for the upheaval of selling the company and getting all of these financial people in who only cared about forecasting because they were a public corporation on the stock market. So they were more interested in how much money are you going to make at the end of the next year? Well, we never in a million years ever thought that way at Chess Records. We were more interested in making great music. Then the money would come.
Right.
So we never projected.
Marshall, this has been so fascinating, but I'm about to cram the next 7 years of your career into about a minute and a half. The Rolling Stones, Tumbling Dice. Is that your favorite one of
Well,
their
it's
songs?
one of my favorites.
From the time that you
I
were
like
involved?
Moonlight. Well, the most favorite, the one that no one ever knows, the funniest of all, is that one I did acoustically for Sir Edward Lewis called "Cocksucker Blues." You know, you ever heard that?
You're not going to say that on this radio
No,
station.
that was
Not even
great.
on this radio station.
That was the best meeting that I've ever been in my life when they've heard that in that boardroom and didn't know it was coming.
Your first task with the Rolling Stones, Marshall, was to extricate them from their involvement with both Decca and Alan Klein.
Yes, that was my first. That was my job, and then to make a new deal and found Rolling Stones Records.
With which you stayed for several albums.
Yes, almost 7 years, 6 albums, I think.
And you enjoyed all that.
I loved it. It was one of my highlight periods of my life.
You're
rough,
going to have
but-
to admit this. You got out of it quite a lot during those years.
Yes, I did. No, I mean I did. At the end, I was a major drug taker, and just decided that it was time to change that scene. So I did. It wasn't because of the Rolling Stones. It was just because of my own. You know, I don't want to blame that on anyone, but there were drugs around that situation, and I had some pain that I hadn't dealt with in me, and I discovered that drugs could kill it. So I was enamored with that for a while. But even so...
So you had to do a complete geographical, as it were, to get away from all
yes,
that. You had to leave the...
Well, I had to figure out why I liked drugs so much. And once I figured that out, I stopped liking or needing them, you know, which was an
Brilliant.
interesting thing.
What are you proud of over all these years?
Surviving.
Yes.
What am I proud of? I'm more proud of the history, the musical history that comes from my family. I mean, I'm just so proud of that my father and my uncle did what they did, and how it's changed. To me, it's helped change lives of everyone who listens to music. Chess was just a fabulous, mystical kind of place, and I got taken along for the ride, not by choice, just because I was born into it.
And this influence could stretch beyond even the planet.
Yes, I hope so. As I said, if I had to really pin it down, the Voyager spacecraft that went out into deep space and are still out there to the end of the universe carry on Johnny B. Good, sung by Chuck Berry. And I've told my children when they were small, I said, can you imagine your grandfather, whom you've never met, came from Poland as an immigrant, discovered black music, produced this artist named Chuck Berry at a record label, and now his music is representing the Earth, the whole Earth, to aliens that it might find in deep space. To me, that's the highlight of any man, yet alone an immigrant from Poland's life. It's just fantastic.
Marshall Chess, thank you.
Thank you. I love being here.